I'll be reading from the June 4th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: the capital earmarked for data centers continues to grow, but supply chain backlogs, permitting fights, and power availability are setting back schedules for their construction. Bitcoin declined for a fourth straight session to around $65,380. U.S. indexes slid, with the S&P 500, Dow, and NASDAQ falling 0.7%, 1.2%, and 0.9% respectively. U.S. crude oil inventories extended their decline to 6 weeks as exports rose and refineries ran near full capacity, EIA data showed. SpaceX bucked tradition when it set a price for its share more than a week before its planned listing, rather than setting a range and refining it after days of meetings with investors. Macy's net sales increased 1.8% to $4.68 billion in the 3 months ended May 2nd. While profit climbed to $63 million from $38 million a year earlier. Volvo said its global sales fell 5.5% year to year to 178,980 vehicles in the 3 months ended May, and added that sales in China remained under pressure. ExxonMobil shares fell after Sherwin-Williams and Nippon Paint said they were dropping their effort to buy the Dutch paint manufacturer. UK regulators said they would allow publishers to opt out of feeding their content to power AI features in Google's online searches. AlphaSense raised $350 million from backers, including Accenture, an inflow that nearly doubled the AI market research platform's valuation. Zara owner Inditex said sales growth picked up last month despite the cost headwinds that apparel companies are experiencing. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Kuwait came under a barrage of ballistic missiles and drones that shut its international airport, killed 1 person, and injured dozens more as Iran launched its largest salvo of the nearly 2-month-long ceasefire. The Republican-led House voted 215 to 208 to restrict Trump's ability to continue the war against Iran without congressional approval. The president told aides that he would consider ending the ceasefire with Iran if Tehran kills American troops, insisting that the pause in airstrikes remains intact. Senate Republicans headed toward a floor showdown over the Trump administration's $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, as some lawmakers sought guarantees in law that the money pot was truly dead. A relatively unknown businessman and farmer, Zach Lunn, upset Trump-backed Congressman Randy Feenstra in Iowa's Republican primary for governor. Top artificial intelligence executives joined security experts in calling on Congress to protect against biological threats posed by the technology. The U.S. proposed new tariffs of at least 10% on many of its trading partners over an alleged failure to address forced labor concerns, and was rebuffed by some of those concerned. Regulators are probing whether former Representative George Santos traded illegally in a predictions contract that referred to his own appearance at this year's State of the Union address. Ebola reached a corner of the Democratic Republic of Congo controlled by Islamic State militants, making it too dangerous for health workers to operate there. A man held 10 people hostage inside a California office building before the FBI shot and killed him, ending a standoff of more than 15 hours. Eating a diet high in ultra-processed foods is associated with an increased risk of dementia, new research shows. The picture on today's front page shows a large structure with a gold dome and a crucifix on top. And in the background is an overview of what appears to be a city with a large black plume of smoke rising in the distance. And that caption reads, "Smoke billowed after Ukrainian drones hit infrastructure in St. Petersburg, Russia, on Wednesday," local authorities said. Russian military commentators warn of a coming Ukrainian offensive. And the headline, "More of Russia's elite urge end to war, but Putin isn't budging." Some prominent hawks now believe outright victory in Ukraine is impossible. By Yaroslav Trofimov. Russia's inability to break through the stalemate in Ukraine is becoming so evident that significant voices in the Russian establishment have publicly started to call for an end to the conflict. The big question is whether President Vladimir Putin will acknowledge this reality and abandon his aspiration to extinguish Ukrainian independence. So far, there is no sign that, in the 5th year of Europe's bloodiest conflict in generations, he is ready to climb down from the original objectives of his special military operation. But that could change if the tide of war turns further in Kyiv's favor. The calls don't just come from the business elites and more liberal parts of the Russian establishment. Some of Russia's best-known hawks have also become much more open in expressing a belief that Moscow simply doesn't have the capacity to achieve an outright victory against Ukraine. One of those is Oleg Saryov, a former Ukrainian lawmaker who fled to Russia in 2014 and who was one of Putin's top candidates for heading a pro-Russian puppet regime that the Kremlin planned to install in an occupied Kyiv in early 2022. He was severely injured in an assassination attempt attributed to Ukrainian intelligence the following year. In a Telegram post in May, Sharyov warned that Russian propaganda had fostered a dangerous illusion about an inevitable victory against Ukraine. Russian officials said they are ready to consider ending the war as long as the U.S. forces Ukraine to abide by the Anchorage Understandings, a reference to a deal allegedly reached by Putin and President Trump in Alaska in August that would involve Ukraine surrendering the heavily defended belt of cities in northern Donetsk. Kyiv has refused to give it up, and Russian forces have made only minimal advances in the region since the summit. Putin has chosen in recent days to intensify missile strikes on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. Heavy barrages on Monday night killed 22 and injured well over 100 civilians, one of the bloodiest attacks in the entire war. At a meeting with security officials hours earlier, Putin said Ukraine will have to endure the new quality of the entire conflict. In the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, mid-range strike drones have in recent days paralyzed Russian logistics, a major new development in the war. Often using artificial intelligence, they have targeted fuel trucks and military convoys on roads that link Russia to the Crimea Peninsula and to bases along the front line. Fuel rationing has been imposed in Luhansk and Donetsk, and supplies have run out in Crimea. Russian military commentators are warning of an imminent Ukrainian offensive. In recent weeks, Ukraine has had greater success in its long-range strikes throughout the European part of Russia, including Wednesday's attack on the oil terminal in St. Petersburg, just as Putin's hometown hosted the opening of an annual economic conference. Kyiv's drone campaign shows the potential of havoc that the Ukrainian forces can bring onto Russia, but it might take time for this to diffuse into society and into political decision-making in Moscow, because they have such an authoritarian grip on the population and the regime that is rather unified in terms of pursuing the war, said Germany's Deputy Defense Minister Niels Schmidt. House rebuffs Trump on war. Measure to restrict powers in Iran conflict passes with support from some GOP, by Terrell Wright, Lindsay Wise, and Olivia Beavers, Washington. The GOP-led House voted to restrict President Trump's ability to continue the war against Iran without congressional approval, a rebuke to the White House, and the latest sign that Republican lawmakers' support for the war is eroding on Capitol Hill. The measure passed 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans joining Democrats in support. The resolution, which is unlikely to become law, directs the president to remove U.S. armed forces from hostilities against Iran unless explicitly authorized by Congress, other than to defend the U.S., an ally or partner, from imminent attack. The war, which began in late February, has shifted from a heavy bombing campaign to a fragile ceasefire as the U.S. and Iran jockey for control of the Strait of Hormuz. Negotiators remain far apart on the future of Tehran's nuclear program, and skirmishes have ticked up in recent days as the U.S. enforces its blockade of Iran and its ports. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing, the 4 Republicans to vote for the measure were Representatives Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, Tom Barrett of Michigan, and Warren Davidson of Ohio. People are tired of $5 a gallon gas and a $6 a gallon diesel and fertilizer we can't afford to put on our fields in Kentucky, said Massey, who lost his primary to a Trump-backed challenger last month. So I think it sends a good message that the People's House, which represents the people, is tired of this war. Democrats were united in favor of the measure. It's the beginning of the end of the war, said Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat from California. The House of Representatives said the American people are tired of it. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, said, very unfortunate outcome, and it's very dangerous at a very serious time. Beyond Iran, the vote marks the latest in a series of setbacks for Trump in Congress and the courts. On Tuesday, the administration said it would kill a controversial anti-weaponization fund that stood to benefit Trump supporters who participated in the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol after strong pushback from GOP senators. His pick of close ally, Bill Pulte, as acting director of national intelligence, also is threatening to derail reauthorization of a critical surveillance power facing a deadline this month after Democrats and some Republicans called Pulte unqualified for the job. 60 Minutes meltdown caps weeks of rancor at CBS News. The collapse of values at the top has become untenable, said Scott Pelley. CBS News fired 60 Minutes reporter Scott Pelley on Tuesday amid a conflict the veteran journalist had with senior leadership. By Isabella Simoletti. Emotions were running high again at CBS News. Longtime 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley had delivered a rebuke of CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss at a staff meeting Monday, accusing her of murdering the storied news show. He also criticized her choice of Nick Bilton as a new executive producer. After his remarks, Weiss and other senior leaders debated how to proceed. People familiar with the matter said. The executives believed Pelley's behavior was insubordinate and a fireable offense, but they decided to speak with him to discuss his future at the network. David Ellison, CEO of CBS's parent Paramount, spoke with Weiss about how she would approach that conversation. People familiar with the situation said. The circumstances of Pelley's departure illustrate a broader moment of crisis within CBS News and its signature show, 60 Minutes. Correspondents who departed recently have accused the network of making editorial decisions for political purposes as Paramount works to close its deal for media company Warner Brothers Discovery. A CBS spokesman said there is no political interference at CBS News, not from ownership, not from Barry Weiss, and it is common for a back and forth between editors and correspondents. Pelly looked emotional as he walked into CBS News President Tom Zabrowski's office Tuesday evening. A person who saw Pelly said. Zabrowski was waiting with Weiss, Bilton, and Human Resources. Hours after what turned into a tense exchange, the correspondent was fired for cause. The situation has escalated so much that Pelly and the network are at odds about what occurred during the meeting. On the network's 9 a.m. editorial call Wednesday, Weiss addressed Pelly's firing. I'm only interested in working in a newsroom that is built on trust and mutual respect, she said, according to a recording of her remarks reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Management had tried to engage with Pelly to find a way back, but couldn't do so and had to part ways, she said. Pelly, who has spent 37 years at CBS, said Wednesday executives didn't offer suggestions that could lead to a resolution and were openly hostile from the start of their meeting the prior evening. Pelly called Weiss's comments at the morning meeting misleading. At the beginning of the meeting Tuesday, Zabrowski told Pelly that he had a long legacy with 60 Minutes and that they would like to talk to him about how to reach a point of civility and go forward, according to a person familiar with the matter. So went another wild week at CBS News. In the past 6 days, 60 Minutes, its signature show, parted ways with 3 high-profile correspondents, turned over its top editorial and producing ranks, and sparked a staff revolt. Just 3 of the show's correspondents who introduced themselves to viewers at the start of each episode remain: Leslie Stahl, John Wertheim, and Bill Whitaker. There is no question that the CBS News brand is severely damaged right now, said Michael Sokolow, a former television journalist who is now a communication and journalism professor at the University of Maine. The real question is whether it can be rebuilt. The turmoil comes at a crucial time for Paramount, which is working to complete its acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery, whose assets include CNN. The deal could close as early as this summer. Ratings for CBS's evening and morning news broadcasts generally trail rivals ABC and NBC. Cable's Fox News has also taken viewers away from all the broadcast networks. Fox News parent Fox Corp and the Wall Street Journal parent News Corp share common ownership. Nick Dolan enjoys a reversal of fortune. James Dolan achieved 2 major triumphs. The New York Knicks reached the NBA Finals for the first time since 1999, and the Sphere in Las Vegas became the world's highest-grossing arena, by Robert O'Connell and Catherine Sayer. For decades, the only thing that seemed less likely than the New York Knicks reaching the NBA Finals was the idea that James Dolan might be the one to lead them there. Dolan, the combative billionaire owner, who has overseen the team since 1999, had failed repeatedly and spectacularly to construct a champion. Instead of collecting trophies, he sued a rival franchise, feuded with fans, and despite his success elsewhere in the entertainment world, relentlessly attacked the NBA itself. Yet Dolan, 71 years old, now finds himself suddenly sitting on not one but two massive triumphs. The concert venue he sketched out a decade ago, Sphere in Las Vegas, has become the world's highest grossing arena. And on Wednesday night, basketball hell froze over. Dolan's Knicks played their first NBA Finals game in 27 years. They won on the road against the San Antonio Spurs 105-95 to take a 1-0 lead in the series. He challenges me. He challenges the players. Knicks coach Mike Brown said of Dolan, "You want that from your boss." Before he climbed to the NBA's mountaintop, though, Dolan spent decades challenging the patience of nearly everyone in the world of professional basketball, starting with Knicks fans. Under Dolan's leadership, the Knicks suffered 16 losing seasons in one 19-year stretch, as fans at Madison Square Garden serenaded him with chants of "Sell the team." Dolan, who didn't respond to a request for comment, has built a sprawling entertainment empire away from the NBA. In addition to Madison Square Garden and its teams, the Knicks and the New York Rangers, his portfolio includes Radio City Music Hall and historic theaters in Chicago and New York. Now for other articles within the paper. Hybrid vehicle sales surge on pricey gasoline. And there's a graph titled Top Selling Hybrid Vehicles Year to Date. Starting at the top, Toyota Camry, Honda CR-V, Toyota RAV4, Toyota Sienna, Toyota Grand Highlander, Honda Accord, Honda Civic, Ford Maverick, Kia Sportage, Hyundai Tucson. The article by Christopher Otts. There is a clear sign that Americans are tired of high gas prices. Hybrid cars and trucks are now hotter than ever. Elevated gas prices, sparked by the U.S.-Israel conflict in Iran, helped drive a 33% jump in hybrid sales in May compared with last year. According to data from Motor Intelligence, a bright spot in the otherwise stagnant new car market. At Stanley Subaru in Ellsworth, Maine, many customers are choosing hybrid versions of the Forester SUV and Crosstrek hatchback, though they cost a few $1,000s more than their gas-only counterparts. The hybrids have been a godsend, said Mark Pollitt, the store's dealer principal. They are hotter than non-hybrids. The sales are helping automakers stoke interest at a time when new car sales are generally weak. Overall, new vehicle sales are down 4.4% in 2026 through May and are expected to continue sliding this year from pre-pandemic highs, with many buyers put off by high interest rates, broader economic uncertainty, and average prices hovering around $50,000. However, with gas rising to $4.26 a gallon on average, more Americans are opting to pay a few $1,000s extra to get a new car that also uses less fuel. In 2026, so far, hybrid sales are up 17% compared with last year. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, why Jill Biden didn't say no. The 46th president's friends, families, and allies didn't think his senility mattered. By Barton Swaim. Jill Biden has lived a remarkable life as the wife of a senator, vice president, and president of the United States. A proper autobiography, related from early life in eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey to the present, might have appealed in due time. At the moment, though, she tops the list of people nobody wants to hear from. What she has produced is a breezy memoir of her years as First Lady, View from the East Wing, manifestly written for the sole purpose of justifying her husband's decision, abetted by her, whatever she may claim, to run for re-election. That decision and the inevitable withdrawal from the race when the media could no longer ignore Joe Biden's diminished condition didn't guarantee a Republican victory in 2024. Every poll made plain that sizable majorities didn't wish to have Donald Trump back. What doomed Kamala Harris wasn't, as she contends, the shortened time she had to campaign. That likely helped, given her signature incompetence as a politician. What made any Democratic nominee's job vastly more difficult in 2024 was Mr. Biden's abysmal performance as president. The perverse effect of Mrs. Biden's book will be to perpetuate the belief among Democrats that they lost because she and her husband's inner circle hid the truth about his decrepitude. That they did hide the truth, or tried to, Mrs. Biden manages to make more obvious. She's a bad fibber. During the 2020 race, Joe had previously floated the idea of voluntarily being a one-term transitional president, she writes. But as he explored the question of a re-election bid, every one of his senior advisors insisted he needed to run. Then this. There had been buzz around various candidates as possible primary contenders against Joe if he decided to leave after one term. But we were told that based on the polling, Joe was the Democrats' best bet. Note the passive voice. We were told. Mrs. Biden's full-on denial that she had ever seen her husband communicate so lifelessly and incoherently as he did at the June 2024 presidential debate won't improve her reputation. Is he short-circuiting? She recalls thinking. Is this a stroke? It felt like we were watching an AI hologram of the man we knew, and the hologram was glitching. Has he been drugged? Oh God, will people watching assume that this is how he is all the time? Nothing explained what I was seeing. I've never seen that look on his face before in my life. Well, I had. 4 years before, at a campaign event in South Carolina. So had everybody who watched Mr. Biden's February 2024 press conference to address Special Counsel Robert Hur's explanation for declining to prosecute the president. In that performance, Mr. Biden had called the president of Egypt, Abdel el-Sisi, the president of Mexico. and generally sounded confused, angry, and exhausted. Mrs. Biden mentions that episode as if it were a minor slip-up. The truth was that he was not performing as well as he had in his younger days. Did that disqualify him from being president, as long as he was still getting the job done? I didn't think so. As my colleague Mary O'Grady quipped at the time, denial ain't just a river in Mexico. And what about telling Mr. Biden how well he'd done after the presidential debate, the one in which he claimed to wonder if he'd been drugged or was having a stroke? As a teacher, I believe in leading with praise no matter how bad the test result or essay is. So I became my teacher's self on stage. Guff of this sort has its entertainment value, as do passages that barely conceal the memorist's disdain for Miss Harris. But the book, or rather the outrage its publication has occasioned, does highlight a serious truth about the progressive mindset animating the Biden's party. Democrats and their fans in the media resent Mr. and Mrs. Biden only for waiting too long to withdraw from the race, and so, as they see it, hamstringing Miss Harris's re-election effort. But for most of Mr. Biden's term, they remained largely unperturbed by the senescence, growing older, itself, despite constant evidence of it, waving to no one, slurring nonsense, asking for a House member who had died a month before. Leave aside the shockingly poor decisions best explainable by decline, the immediate, unplanned pullout from Afghanistan, the failure even to acknowledge chaos at the southern border. Why the unconcern? The progressive outlook makes little room for individual discernment, intuition, and shrewdness in political leaders. Mr. Biden's Democratic apologists mistakenly assumed that because he and the people around him held the right views, they favored all the good things and opposed all the bad. His bodily and mental infirmity wouldn't matter. Jill Biden thought the same, which is why she felt so comfortable putting her husband up for another 4-year term. What the U.S. has accomplished in Iran. The regime is much weaker. The time is on the side of the U.S. and its allies that want a more stable region. By Condoleezza Rice. The war against Iran has been a limited war, and its outcome is likely to be inconclusive. But it has achieved enough to produce a far better Middle East. The 3-month military campaign degraded Iran's ability to project power by significantly damaging its conventional forces, missile stockpiles, and proxies. It drew America, Israel, and the Arab states closer together through defense cooperation and intelligence sharing. In this regard, Israel has never been more secure. Israel responded furiously to the terrorist attack of October 7, 2023, and pummeled Iranian proxies, including Hezbollah and Hamas, that threatened its population. Securing international support for its continued efforts to deal with that threat remains a diplomatic hurdle for Jerusalem. But many Arab regimes no longer question Israel's legitimacy. Instead, they seek the benefits of technological and economic cooperation with Israel. Modernization is their strongest motivation. The war demonstrated that the Iranian regime's leaders were physically vulnerable to U.S. military power and allied intelligence. It also showed that although Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz, that leverage is limited, as the U.S. blockade confronted Iran with the prospect of severe economic damage in return. The war also had global implications. It showed that China is no friend of the Arab world, as Beijing watched from the sidelines as Iran attacked the economic infrastructure of the region. Ukraine, which used its advanced defensive capabilities to support the war effort against Iran, demonstrated that it is an asset to the U.S. and its allies. Given the mounting strategic losses for Russia, Syria, Venezuela, possibly Cuba, and on the battlefield in Ukraine, this is the time to press the advantage on behalf of Kyiv. Most important, along with Operation Midnight Hammer last June, Operation Epic Fury set back Iranian nuclear ambitions significantly. It will be a long time before Iran can build a viable nuclear weapon. Yes, there are large stockpiles of highly enriched uranium somewhere in Iran, but this is a problem for the future, not today. Even if the uranium is at 60% enrichment, a fairly short technical step away from weapons grade, taking that final step is virtually impossible today. To reach weapons grade, 93% or higher, the material must be spun in sensitive centrifuges that are subject to breakage. It is hard to imagine that Iran's centrifuge cascades survived the intense bombing. The Iranian conversion facility, without which one can't make a bomb, was destroyed. Its A team of nuclear scientists has been eliminated. In sum, Iran is far weaker today than it was in February. No amount of Iranian propaganda can mask this reality. America's near-term goal should be to keep it in that weakened state, to strengthen the region's political realignment, and to make certain that President Trump's promise that Iran will never possess a nuclear weapon is fulfilled. The U.S. doesn't need a nuclear agreement with Iran to achieve these goals. But once the Strait of Hormuz is opened, if the administration engages in nuclear negotiations, it's critical that the following conditions are maintained. Not a single penny of frozen assets or sanctions relief should go to Tehran. Under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran used the money to rebuild its capability and those of its proxies. It would do so again. The U.S. must maintain military readiness in the region and the will to attack again if the Iranians begin to rebuild their nuclear infrastructure or missile capabilities. We should publicly expose any Russian or Chinese efforts to help the regime rebuild these capabilities. Additionally, the lessons of the war should spur deeper defense, technological and intelligence cooperation with allies in the region, particularly concerning asymmetric warfare in the age of drones. The international community should again reaffirm the dangers of a nuclear Iran. Our European allies have behaved shamefully, standing by as the U.S. dealt with growing Iranian capabilities and Iran attacked regional powers. Our allies need to re-engage with us and we with them. Iran isn't only our problem. It isn't only an Israeli problem. The United Nations Security Council between 2006 and 2010 passed 5 resolutions declaring Iran's nuclear ambitions under Chapter 7 and action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. The next time our European friends are inclined to say that conflict with Iran is not our war, they should reread those resolutions. Whenever possible, by both overt and covert means. The U.S. and Israel should undermine the region's capacity to oppress its own population. We owe this to the Iranian people. Finally, we should secure the world's energy and transportation systems against the vulnerabilities revealed by the war. It is puzzling that the Trump administration appeared to be caught off guard by Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, despite decades of anticipation of this by military experts in planning exercises. The U.S. can't afford to be surprised again. This war hasn't brought, as many had hoped, the end of the Iranian regime, but it has left a weaker, more confused one. The public hasn't seen Mojtaba Khomeini since his installation as supreme leader. Economic pressure has made the regime vulnerable, not necessarily to the street, where it can always crush dissent, but perhaps to internal fractures over Iran's future relationship with the world. If the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps controls 40% of the economy, as reports indicate, the U.S. must make sure Tehran understands that 40% of nothing is nothing. Strategic patience is hard, and it isn't always satisfying, but time is on the side of the U.S. and its allies. Reaching no deal is fine. Reaching a bad deal isn't. This is a new day in the Middle East, though it isn't one without clouds. No American president has had a better chance to build a different and more stable region. It may just take a little more time. Miss Rice is director of Stanford University's Hoover Institution. She served as U.S. Secretary of State 2005 to 2009. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. American Idol. The work ethic goes out of style. 1 in 3 working-age American men aren't so much as looking for a job. By Jason L. Riley. Maybe you've seen the old video clip on social media. It's the one in which comedian Chris Rock explains how to tell good from bad neighborhoods based simply on who isn't working in the middle of the day. Quote, if you're in any neighborhood in America at 12:15 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and you see women with sweatpants on coming out of the gym, pushing babies, riding bikes, Mr. Rock explains chances are you're in a nice neighborhood. There's probably a Whole Foods nearby. But if you see men in sweatpants smoking cigarettes, hanging with their boys, lifting weights in the yard, riding children's bicycles as their actual transportation, then you are in danger. Mr. Rock's funny and insightful bit came to mind as I read last month's job report, which showed that the share of American men in the labor force has dipped to record lows. According to the Department of Labor, 1 in 3 men were neither working nor looking for a job in April. Among males 20 and older, the 66% labor force participation rate is down from 73% in 2006. Mr. Rock was highlighting the correlation between unemployment and crime, but public safety isn't the only concern raised by a large population of idle young males. The premature absence of millions of able-bodied men from our workforce, combined with the continuing retirement of the baby boomers and significant reductions in immigration, bodes ill for the country. A life without gainful employment has become a viable alternative for an increasing number of American males. COVID job disruptions didn't help, but the problem of men in their prime working years, 25 to 54, exiting the job market long predates the pandemic. In his book, Men Without Work, demographer Nicholas Eberstadt reported that the work rate for men 20 and older fell by more than 13 percentage points between 1965 and 2015. During that half century, he added, the fraction of men without jobs of any sort in the broad 20 to 64 group went from 10% of the total to almost 22%. And the percentage of wholly jobless prime age men shot from 6% to nearly 16%. The long-term rise in male joblessness doesn't stem from an inability to find employment. It results instead from an unwillingness to search for work. And while labor force participation rates vary by race and ethnicity, factors other than hiring discrimination seem to be playing a larger role in the disparities. The legacy of prejudice might seem to explain why prime age male work rates and workforce participation rates are lower for blacks than whites today. But they cannot explain why work rates and LFPRs for white men today are decidedly lower than they were for black men in 1965, Mr. Eberstadt wrote. Nor can they explain why labor participation rates of married black men 25 to 54 are higher than for never married white men in the same age group. Some blame technological advances and deindustrialization for the increase in male idleness, but those barriers are hardly insurmountable. Like married men who are trying to support their families, foreign-born males who come to the U.S. in search of work also tend to have higher work rates, notwithstanding globalization and other macroeconomic trends. Neither married men nor immigrants are stealing these jobs. Rather, they are seizing employment opportunities that others spurn. The most likely culprit is a social safety net full of generous government benefits that allow men who won't work to subsist. Welfare and disability programs at the state and federal level are well funded by the political left, are easily gamed by design, and have become a significant source of income for men with no job and no interest in finding one. Because these men often have no problem mooching off the women who take them in, they're able to live on welfare payments sent to others in the same household. Democrats in Washington often look to Europe as a social welfare model for the U.S. A recent journal editorial on Britain's workforce woes ought to give them pause. According to a new report from former Labor Health Secretary Alan Milburn, nearly 1 million Brits under 25 aren't employed, in school, or in job training. Nearly half of Britain's idle youth now claim to have a work-limiting disability, the journal noted. And around 7 in 10 youth who claimed a disability benefit are still on it a decade later. Europe's large safety net isn't a model for America. It's a cautionary tale. Now for the interest rates compared to last week and today. A money market annual yield was 0.42%, now 0.43%. A 5-year CD annual yield remains 1.71%. A 30-year fixed mortgage was 6.66%, now 6.58%. A 15-year mortgage fixed was 6.07, now 6.01. Jumbo mortgages were 6.70, now 6.65. A 5-year adjustable mortgage remains 6.02%. A new car loan, 48 months, remains 6.96%. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 4th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and enjoy the weekend.